let's get into our next panel. We're going to speak about what this paradigm shift looks like in practice. We'll be bringing together practitioners from across the B Corp system. We will have attorney Vivian Tu, principal at Vivian Tu Law Practice. Vivian is very special and dear to the B Corp movement. She's actually helped define the legal amendment that many of you may be familiar with that is required for B Corps to actually change their bylaws and embed stakeholder governance in their operations. We'll also hear from Ms. Eleni Papadopoulou, who's the Chief Operating Officer at TUCERT. Eleni is also a long-term friend of the B Corp movement, having spent many years with Sistema V as well. We have the pleasure of inviting Todd Frank, Director of Southeast Asia for SCS Global Services, a new friend to the B Corp movement. Then Ms. Brigitte Nemes, Senior Manager for Environmental and Governance Standards at B Lab. Brigitte and I have the chance to work closely as we figure out how to turn the standards into a practical assurance model. And lastly but not least, we'll have Ravisankar Ramachandran, Senior Project Manager at Peterson Solutions. And moderating the panel, a dear friend of mine, Yibing Beng, Head of ESG Services at Genashtim and Director of B Market Builder Southeast Asia. Yibing is a certified GRI professional and has delivered learning programs across the region. He's also a sought-after speaker across Southeast Asia. You may have seen him on stage translating for some of our speakers. He's also partially blind, and through his lived experience, he helps advance equity and a human-centered approach to business. Thank you for being with us. I'd like to invite all speakers to the stage.
A very good morning to everyone. Hope you guys have a great time. And indeed, it's a privilege for me to be able to be here today moderating the first panel of the second day. First of all, I just want to give thanks to Ishik for the very warm introductions and welcome. And well, it is actually very personal for me as I myself am actually a beneficiary of how B Corp has impacted. You know, I'm working with Genashtim since 2020. And because of Genashtim's vision, alignments with B Corp, I got a job, and a good one. Well, enough about me. And, you know, when blind gets the chance to speak on the microphone, we tend to be very grumpy. So I'll give more times for our panelists to share a little bit deeper insights. As Clit shared just now, you know, definitely we are going through a very fun period, I would say, even though despite the geopolitical uncertainties and so on, but we are here as one community moving on together. But I would like to address some of the difficult questions for this panel, particularly some of the hot questions that we get on the ground from companies. So, you know, when we see the first time the new standard was launched, most of the questions that I got is that, wow, this could be a difficult one. We hear words like, you know, increasing the bar. We hear words like being more comprehensive, you know. So the most interpretation is that this will be difficult. So maybe I'll address the first question to Brigitte, who is also assisting in the development of the new standards. Brigitte, so can you share with us, you know, some of the things that about the new standards that are actually more accessible, but often than not having a misconception that, you know, or some other interpretations that people misperceive about the new standard that is more accessible than what it's supposed to be?
Yes, thank you for the question.
Yeah.
It's great to be here with everyone today. So maybe first of all, the standards are differentiated by size and sector. And I think that's good to bear in mind that it's not the same requirements for all size and sector of companies. So for instance, if you're talking about the size, the rigor and the number of requirements increases with the size. So for a smaller company, it's much less requirements that they need to comply with compared to a large company. And the same with sector as well. If I can maybe share an example. So for instance, a small service company in terms of the environment has much limited requirements to comply with. Like if you are in a consulting or in an advertising company, then you really need to focus on what really matters for your type of sector. So that would be the clients that you work with and the projects that you work on. So for those types of companies, we ask that you have a process in place to assess any potential environmental impact related to your clients and projects, and then also take any action if there is any potential negative impact. Versus if you're talking about a large manufacturing company, then the requirements for them are much more rigorous. So they need to conduct a comprehensive impact assessment of their operations and value chain to identify any negative environmental impact, and then define a strategy to address those. And they also have to comply with more rigorous requirements around their supply chain. So they need to engage their suppliers, and they also need to increase the visibility into the origin of their raw materials. That's one thing. And B Lab also introduced, I think that's something unique to this certification, is the so-called equity mechanism. Because we understand that companies face unequal conditions depending on the locations that they operate in. Just let me simply put, doing business in Myanmar is very different than doing business in the Netherlands. So that's something that the standards also acknowledge. So companies that operate in countries with more operational barriers, they can actually skip some certain sub-requirements in the standards. And I also want to emphasize one other thing that's, again, I think unique to this certification program, that companies who join the B Lab movement, they really join an engaged and very collaborative community. So they are not alone. And I think yesterday we also heard from some of the panelists about that, this collaboration, that you are not just a tree in the desert, but you are part of a forest. And that's what we see that is really coming through bottom up. We have a lot of B Corps that collaborate in their sector. One example would be the B Corp Beauty Coalition that brings together 90 B Corps from this industry to really try to change their industry for the better. And I can have also numerous other examples as well, where they really try to solve the biggest problems that we face today together, because no single business can do that alone. So I think that's also something that's relevant for companies in this region as well, that they are not alone. They would really be joining a collaborative community.
Thank you, Brigitte. In fact, I'm comforted to hear that B Corp standards even accommodate for different economic situations and different market situations as well. I think it's a good news, especially for some of the developing markets in part of Asia. Maybe, Eleni, from your experience, verifying more than 11,000 companies under the new standards and now being introduced to the old standards are now being introduced to the new standards. What do you think some of the things that company could already kind of like able to prepare in the old standards and easily transition to the new standards? And if true, is it true that the new one is much, much more complicated compared to the old one?
Hello. Okay, thank you. Thank you for the question. I think there's a lot of misinformation, or there's a lot of noise about the new standards being such a higher bar, as you said. And I think the biggest change is that it's clearer what it is to be a B Corp. So in the years that I worked at Sistema B, I interacted with hundreds of companies who would ask me, what is a B Corp? And this what is a B Corp was different for a company that was in the services sector. It was different for a company that was in manufacturing. It was different if they were in a developing country or emerging country or a developed country. So I think that one of the things that I would tell a company is that this is a clearer path. It's easier. You need to register, create a risk profile, and you immediately know what are the requirements for your company. And you immediately know the gaps that you have to meet. So it's already easier. You're also not collecting points like you did before. So you're now across the board, and you have a clearer path as to where your efforts should be made. I also ran into many companies who had sporadic practices here and there, and there was no coherence or direction. And how to prepare, because that was mainly your question, is to, as Clay said, register to get started, and write things down. Create a folder and start writing things down for each impact area, and remember that it is something that it's all about continuous improvement. So it might be prescriptive, it might all seem daunting, but I think the most difficult part is what you've already done, which is to convince yourselves and your board and your executive team that you want to create positive impact through your businesses. And that's the hard part. The rest is evidencing, writing down, and I guess scheduling your audit call, just to keep it really practical. Yeah, I don't know if I answered your question, Yibeng.
Thanks for that. In fact, I think clarity is one very good key point. I do receive some feedback from some of the companies as well. They are transitioning, especially those who are very familiar with the different standards. And I believe that the clarity provides a better mission for them. Maybe a question to Todd, since SCS deals with different types of certifications, and how do you see B Corp as a unique value proposition among all the alphabet soup, all the certification label out there?
Sure. Good morning. Thank you, Yibeng. As it was touched on by Clay earlier, third-party certification really exists to create trust at scale. And so by including an audit and a third-party certification component under the new standards, B Corp is really leveling up and enabling that trust in the marketplace. But to your question, what I think differentiates B Corp from the alphabet soup is that it's not just looking at a single attribute, say, is it organic or is it made with recycled materials? And it's really looking at how the business is run. So I think that's an important differentiator, and that it's increasingly what the marketplace is looking for. They don't just want to know that the particular item is sustainable, but they want to know that the company behind it shares their values and has that operating system to embed sustaintation in their day-to-day operations.
Thank you, and that's I think that is also one of some of the key backslash to some of the organizations that use certain ways of greenwashing if only one areas are complying. I think operational wise, if it's holistic as what Clay shared, I think this is a good thing. So now we are going to move, a little bit further, looking into some of the practical questions. We do know that these new standards are designed in a way aligning with a lot of standards out there, be it the Europe standards and the regulatory requirements. So, for those organizations, particularly the larger one, they are already needing to comply, let's say, in the European reporting standards, the ESRS, the CSRD. Just now, we also heard from Clay about the CSDDD, the due diligence, and so on. Maybe I would like to get a little bit of your opinion, Vivian, as a legal practitioner. So if, let's say, companies going into the B Corp and looking into these standards and, already facing a lot of such requirements, so how do you think this B Corp fits into this picture by either meeting them now, or perhaps preparing them for the future?
Yeah, thank you, Yibeng. Firstly, I'm really glad to be part of this. Thank you, Genashtim team and B Market Builder Southeast Asia for inviting me. And I've really been welcomed into the B Corp family over the years. And as a Malaysian, I'm really proud that we are having the first B Corp Asia Summit here in Kuala Lumpur. So thank you for that, and thanks, Yibeng, for the question. To bring a legal perspective, thank you very much. Yeah. I've been in a lot of sustainable finance circles talking about impact investing and ESG. And quite often, there are not many lawyers in the room, but actually I would really like to kind of emphasize that so much around us, it has sort of need for rigor, and I hope that I can contribute some aspects of that. And I think maybe I would really start with recapping what Chris said yesterday, which is really what B Corp certification to me is about. I think he put it really well. It is a business as a force for good, where it's good for business, as the framework drives authenticity and pushes companies in doing better. So that's the one key part of it. So in the past 10 years, really, there's been a lot of emphasis on companies having responsible business conduct, and as a capital markets lawyer, I've also followed closely with the global requirements and in stock exchanges requirements on companies doing reports, ESG reports, and actually a lot of it has been sort of backward-looking data gathering, a lot of metrics. And there's an emphasis on compliance, but I think the companies globally, many of them under such requirements have been inundated with sort of regulatory pressures, but also different stakeholders' expectations and a growing array of regulatory requirements, such as those that Yibeng mentioned and Clay mentioned this morning. So it's like alphabet soup of requirements. But I think one gap that I've picked up over the years is that companies are required to report on these items, but they don't really know sort of how they'll get there and what is actually expected. So I've actually really been drawn to the B Corp standards because one thing is I think the standard's been around for some time, but under the previous certification requirements, there's already an emphasis on management processes, structures that companies should have in place. So in a way, the way I see that the next phase of development is actually being grounded in those and be able to reach the baseline that we've just described. And that actually is what I see is lacking in the mainstream markets, if I can kind of refer to that, where companies don't know what good looks like. So you have requirements around environment, you have requirements around business and human rights. For Malaysia, we have a national climate policy. We are all looking to aim for net zero by 2050 under Paris Agreement. Last year, Malaysia also adopted a National Action Plan for Business and Human Rights, which is actually the international framework that underlies regulatory requirements in Europe, such as the CSDDD. And so, in a way, this is actually very close to the challenges that businesses have to meet everywhere, including in Malaysia and in Europe. So I think the new standards sort of continues the framework in terms of processes and stakeholder governance, and which is holistic and prepares and better prepares B Corps, as well as really spotlight on the North Star for mainstreamed companies on meeting these requirements with rigor and actually being able to have the concrete pathways. So I see the B Labs as new standards being able to support that as well.
Thank you. I think it's about, if I may clarify, it's about the processes to actually reach those requirements, right?
Yeah, I think, thank you, Yibeng. The processes is one key part of it, but at the same time, the new standards with the baseline requirements across 7 topics is very clear in terms of what should be expected. So that drives consistency across B Labs. While I think helpfully, as Brigitte clarified, it's not the same requirement for all the companies. It's differentiated and therefore accessible. And in a way, I also see that it helps sort of being clear that the responsibility expected of larger companies is different from the small and medium-sized companies, but at the same time, the clear requirements apply across the board, across sector, across sizes of companies. So we all then have a common sort of North Star on what good looks like.
Thank you for that. Now, next, I would like to touch a little bit on, one of the new features introduced in the B Impact assessment is a term called the interoperability. Technically speaking, is how, in a sense, it is aligned, whether on the concept level or directly on the actual design level, that it is aligned with, the other standards out there, particularly most of it for the reporting. So maybe to both of you, Brigitte and Vivian, so when we say it is interoperable with other standards, what exactly it really means? And does it mean that, if I have already complied with SO and it's interoperable with, let's say, GRI or ESRS European standards, I am pretty much good with that, or have to redo something else? This is some of the most common question that I got. As often than not, company would say that I've already done my reporting. I would not like to have another double work. Yeah, how would you address this?
Yeah, I can start. So indeed, the new standards were developed with interoperability in mind. So that means that for each requirement, you will be able to see an interoperability section where we listed all the other standards that like major frameworks that have an interoperable data point. So where there is something similar that's asked in the B Lab standards and the other standard. And in terms of standards, so we've included the majority of the leading disclosure standards. So that would be Global Reporting Initiative, but also in the EU, the CSRS or CSRD or ESRS sustainability reporting standards, but also CDP, the IFRS standards as well. So the climate and sustainability standards for financial reporting. So those have already mapped, and for each requirement, companies will be able to see these matching data points. And the intent here is to ease the documentation burden. So if companies are already preparing to meet one of these disclosure standards, then they can use that type of evidence also to support the evidence that's needed to meet the requirements of the B Lab standards. So but that also, to turn it around, by meeting the B Lab standards, companies can actually also accelerate their readiness to comply with the mandatory disclosures as well. And maybe just to add here that while the disclosure requirements ask companies to disclose the metrics that they track, the B Lab standards also ask companies to act on those. So it's not just about disclosure. Maybe that's the difference between a disclosure standard and a performance standard like the B Lab standards.
Thank you, Britta. I'm not too sure, Vivian, if you have anything to add on top of that.
Yeah, thank you for starting with that, Brigitte. Actually, I've really been privileged to be on the Standards Advisory Group for Asia and being involved in the standards development process. I know how much effort the B Lab team and the community has put into the development of the new standards. And it actually involves mapping and understanding in detail all the different requirements. And so you're kind of really feeling it, and so almost like in the same shoes as companies having to deal with all those requirements that we talk about here. And so I do think that that's what coming into, or B Corps can lean on, which is that knowledge, and then is passed on as tools and guidance to B Corps. And the other thing that I would like to add is that as part of that development process. I was also involved in a project where we looked at the new standards as proposed against laws and regulations in 25 jurisdictions and mostly emerging markets in Latin America, Asia Pacific, some key centers, including Australia, New Zealand, and also Africa. And initially, the idea is that while this will be a set of voluntary standards, we want to identify if there are any barriers in these jurisdictions under the laws and policy trends and direction, which would be sort of a potential difficulty for companies that want to become B Corps in such jurisdictions. And also want to ensure that, we kind of keep up with whatever is going above and beyond in these markets. And the good news is we have been able to identify that the B Lab standards lead and is holistic across the board. But at the same time, we see that across, maybe it's under the International Paris Agreement alignment, and also there are also very detailed expectations around environmental circularity and even compliance with some of the kind of detailed production or chemical related requirements. We were able to see that globally we're all aiming to the same goals. And so it's actually expected to be introduced down the line in these jurisdictions. So again, picking up on what Brigitte said, the B Corp framework, the new standards, will really get companies better prepared and ready for all these global standards that will be led by policy and regulations. So I think that's a confirmation of the point on interoperability. Thank you.
Amazing. I think this is also what the audience would really love to hear. And this is a way preparing companies for the future regulatory change. So I would just want to move a little bit more, from company perspective when they are doing export. I believe that some of this question has been a little bit briefly addressed by Todd, Brigitte, and Vivian yourself. But, how can companies be very confident when they have a B logo out there doing exporting? What are the things that, can give that confidence in them that they would be able to getting a lower barrier of entries into the export market and even secure investment or even, securing contracts from multinationals? Yeah, anyone can pick it up.
If I may, on this point, I think maybe speaking to the audience here, I think one of the couple of big concerns would be how would an export-focused markets like Malaysia be able to meet the requirements coming from Europe, whether it's under CBAM, which is related to carbon and climate transition, or in terms of meeting the due diligence requirements under the existing, because the SDDD is coming into place in the next couple of years, but at the moment there's already requirements under various European country legislation. So there's already an expectation because of the regulatory standards is already, there's been a focus on supply chain, human rights standards. And so I guess with the B Lab new standards, which includes very specific baseline on climate as well as on human rights, companies can be better prepared to be able to meet the European requirements. And that is also a trust, because at the same time in the European markets, there's already this awareness and understanding of the B Corp certification. And so that is also something that, other than the details that I just described, I think that stamped and certification would already sort of present that companies in question into a different category, as I would imagine. Yeah.
Thank you, Vivian. Any from Brigitte or?
Yeah, I can add to that.
Yeah.
So indeed, as Vivian also mentioned, many companies are impacted by this sustainability legislation, let it be in Europe, but also in Asia. Like we know that like the IFRS S2 climate disclosure standard is also have been adopted or being adopted in many of the countries here. Now we know that for the most part, it's larger companies that are directly in the scope of those legislation. But of course, we know that many smaller companies, SMEs, are in the supply chain of those larger companies. So regardless if a small company is directly in scope, but they will be impacted if they export to the European market or if they are in the supply chain of the larger companies here in Asia. So that means that if they meet the B Lab standards, they can position themselves better because they can, in a way, help meet the disclosure requirements that large companies are impacted by.
Thank you. Thank you. So maybe I'll move on to another areas more of, from companies' point of view when they are preparing and using the B Impact assessment. I think more towards for those who are really aiming for certifications. So maybe I would like to check with Eleni, what would be some of the general advice you would kind of like give companies preparing for the new standards? I mean, we would definitely have a breakout session to have a deep dive later on, but can you give us a high-level overview, what kind of expectations that we are looking at, maybe from the point of view of the independent verification body, certification body?
So during the audit itself, you mean?
Yes,
Right.
correct. Preparation for the audits, yeah. What are
Yeah.
some of the general tips and advice?
So I think it's important to note that the work is upfront, the majority on the side of those that are seeking certification or recertification. So creating your self-assessment and then declaring your status in regards to that or how close you are to meeting it, uploading documentation to the platform, and then at that point, you've done quite a lot of work. Advice at that point is to have someone who is in charge of this process. Depending on the size of your company, might just be you, the owner, CEO, HR manager, etc. And then, once you get those documents submitted, there is a process once you enter. You're assigned to an assurance provider, either SES or 2cert, and at that point you begin the process to begin audit. So it's still pre-audit. There's still a process to review your application, to get you assigned to an audit team who reviews your documentation, and then when you are actually assigned and you set the date for your audit, that audit's going to be a limited time frame that you've pre-agreed with your audit team. So what to expect during that audit period, the clock starts running, once you've agreed, and you'll be very consciously agreeing to that. I can do it on the 3rd, for example, is to be prepared and have your documents ready. You'll have a chance to see what auditors picked up as a gap. So during audit, you'll be able to share your screen and say, oh, this was a gap, but I have it here. Bring along the people that are owners of that process so they can clarify any questions regarding the source of information that brought you to those numbers or to that plan. And expect it to be more structured, I would say, for those that have been through the B Corp certification under the 1.6 standards. It is under ISO 17021, so it does have to follow a structure of compliance. So yeah, expect it to be more concrete. But of course, as I've mentioned before, especially the 2cert auditors, we have a lot of experience auditing or verifying companies under the 1.6 standards. So that empathy, I think, will help in trying to to help you understand the differences or the equivalency or the changes, at least prior to the audit beginning. So that would be my main kind of advice. It's front loading, uploading information, and identifying the right people that need to be present during audit. Make yourselves available in the determined time frame, and don't want to go into the other topics.
Yep.
I'll keep it.
No problem. We'll definitely discuss even more during our breakout session. So for those of you who haven't registered for the breakout group session, so if you would like to know deeper in-depth about the processes and all that, you're welcome to. So far, we have been hearing all the friends of B Corp, and we haven't yet to hear an independent voice outside. So I would like to turn to you, Ravi. So as you hear all of this, sharing from since morning, Clay, until now, what would you think, because you have been working with some of the toughest certifications with your clients under Peterson. We are talking about, RSPO, one of the palm oil, very tough palm oil standards. We have forestry standards that you are managing. So I just want to check, Ravi, what do you think, objectively, the strength of the entire B Corp certifications and, in terms of preparations and for the companies to go into this kind of a certification, be it B Corp or whatever, what would be a general piece of advice? So two parts of the questions. Yeah.
Okay. Thanks, Tan. And thank you for inviting. So yes, we are quite new in B Corp, and but we hope that we can continue the journey with B Corp and moving forward. So yes, coming from the world of one of the biggest sustainability certification like RSPO, ISCC, and FSC, for companies like going for those certification, the often mistakes that I see is they start with asking, how do I get certified? They focus directly on certification. I think, yes, of course, I don't blame them for them to get their products into the market, for them to export to different countries like Europe, Japan, or US. They have to get certified. But for standards like B Corp, stop asking how do I get certified, but asking why do you have to certify? Why you need B Corp standard? So I think standards like B Corp, you have to see on how is relevant to your business, how is relevant to your business strategy and operations. For example, in terms of stakeholders, so try to understand who are your stakeholders, who your internal stakeholders or who your external stakeholders, and what are the needs and expectation towards the company, and what is your expectation towards them. And I think most companies already contributing to that. They already have proper system in place. They already have investment to local communities. And what lacks most often is not the action, but a proper structure, a proper documentation process. So for some company that want to start, our companies don't need a biggest team or biggest budget to start B Corp. What they need to know is what they're already doing, what are the gaps, and what else they can do to improve over time. I mean, it can be 1 year or 8 years. I see some companies took 8 years to get certified B Corp. That's fine. Time is not the issue. It's what kind of action you have to move towards that kind of certification. And most RSPO certification and so on, and their focus is different. They focus on products, they focus on supply chain, they look at whether the product's legal, whether the supply chain is the product is traceable, and not. I think they answer a different question, they solve different problems. And for example, when you're looking at diversity, all this kind of certification, they focus on whether there's discrimination process exists, but that's often not a major focus. But standards like B Corp, they really look into diversity. Like for a company, they have 50 female employee, and less than 1% are in a management position, or decision-making position. I think standards like B Corp really looks into closing the gaps, focus on diversity, focus on inclusion processes. I think that's what makes B Corp different. And on environmental and social compliance, I think most of the standards out there, they focus on compliance. But what I think B Corp, they focus on purpose. For example, like for coffee business, we did a project on coffee mapping for one of the biggest company in Malaysia. So what we did is we mapped all the smallholders in Malaysia, and one of the objective that this company wants to have is they want to ensure that 100% of their coffee is domestically sourced. So that's why I'm saying. So if you're having business in Malaysia focusing on coffee, what kind of contribution you have to local community, local farmers, how do you want to include them into your business operation and contributing to the livelihood of the smallholders. So I do often see these standards out there, they don't compete with each other, but they complement to each other. So most companies do have, we just have to build upon it. They're just trying to solve different issues, trying to answer different questions.
Thank you, Ravi. I think that is very comprehensive. It's also a fresh perspective. I have some questions from the audience, and please welcome to key in your questions, if any. And maybe this addressed to perhaps more on the Brigitta or Todd or Eleni, more on the standards. So do the B-Lab new standards address environmental racism? I don't even know there is such a word. Yeah. What do you think? How do the new standards address environmental racism?
So I think what it's getting into is likely a little bit around when companies are addressing their environmental impact, how does that impact then any social impacts as well. So for instance, if they are trying to address their climate impact and mitigate that, does that mean that they're also considering the impact on people for these actions? Maybe that's something related to that, but we can maybe also ask a clarification from the person who submitted it.
Yeah.
But in general, the standards look at all the different types of stakeholders that the companies have, right? So first of all, it's linking it to the B Corp legal requirement, where companies need to consider the impact of their decisions on all stakeholders, not just shareholders, right? So that includes the environment, but also communities, workers, etc. So that's something that we also try to put into practice by having a dedicated impact topic called purpose and stakeholder governance. So within that impact topic, we do ask companies that they have an engagement mechanism, or for larger companies, even a policy in place to ensure that decision makers consider the interest of the different stakeholders when they are taking a decision, let it be about where they place their factory or any other like strategic decision. And this needs to be like overseen by the highest governing body, so by the top of the company. So that's something that's one of the core aspects of the B-Lab standards, this stakeholder governance, and there are various other requirements that are basically help companies to put that into practice. And if we are talking about just transition, that's actually a requirement that's emphasized under the climate action impact topic. So for larger companies, this is something that they do need to consider. They do need to engage their stakeholders. First of all, they need to map who are those stakeholders that their climate action plan may negatively affect. But they also need to understand who are those stakeholders in their value chain that are largely impacted by the climate crisis, right? So it's also a little bit the climate justice piece as well. And then they need to engage those stakeholders, and based on the feedback that they receive, they need to integrate then targets and actions into their climate transition plan. So it's at the end, it's really trying to address issues holistically and ensuring that companies have the mechanisms in place to be able to consider the different stakeholders when they are implementing their strategies.
Yeah, and if I can add, thanks, Brigitte. So actually, there was the part 2 that I wanted to capture of what Chris said yesterday, and I read out here, and I think it's touched on earlier. The movement shifts from shareholder primacy to shareholder capitalism, and actually requires corporate accountability to claims and standards, and that involves the legal mission lock. And actually that's the B Corp legal requirement, and this incorporates the legal foundation and rigor, which also offers legal protection for businesses to incorporate corporate purpose and impactful business model. So I guess 3 points I'd like to supplement, if I may. Firstly, the governance is actually a key part, and mission, purpose, and stakeholder governance, I would trust everybody agrees, our essence of B Corp certification. And so the B Corp legal requirements are not updated. So I haven't thought to focus on this at this panel. But this afternoon, we will have a full breakout session about the B Corp legal requirement. So do come along to that one if you would like to learn more. But in essence, there is this focus on how it's different for B Corps, and actually it extends also how the current environment where more is expected of companies, from consumers, from governments, and from all stakeholders, how should corporate directors respond? And in the same way that the new standards sort of guides companies, the clarity of the B Corp legal requirement also actually very specifically guides companies in terms of through its business model and operations, deliver positive material impact to environment and people, and specifically incorporates provisions for directors to be able to be mandated, but also expected to take into account stakeholders, suppliers, consumers, and the community in decision making. And actually, that's the world that is increasingly expected of companies. And so that governance at the heart of B Corp is very important. And so that's a part that I really, wanted to kind of supplement and pick up on what Ravian said. And then the second point is environmental risk. That question, that is within the climate part of the impact topic, and also under environment and circularity. And so actually, globally, from policy to institutional capital to impact investors, there's sort of a big emphasis on climate, but climate is not the only environmental risk. So sometimes I find that that's then overlooked, that people don't focus on the ongoing environmental risk that needs to be managed. So I think that's something that I'm really glad that B Lab standards continues to be holistic and kind of raise the bar across all of these topics and not just focusing on one area over others. But I think it also encompasses the idea of climate transition and just transition, as Brigitte said. And this is, as a matter of international law, increasingly recognized that there is duty, legal duty on governments as well as in companies in terms of addressing climate risks and impact on people and our habitat. And so this is also extending to nature. So I think increasingly we'll have to manage climate, nature, and people risk at the same time. And so, again, I think the new standards are holistic in addressing all of this. Yeah.
Thank you, Vivian. Thank you, Brigitte. So I received quite a number of questions from the audience. Some are a little bit more technical, but I think I would like to start with this one. So there's a question actually on, we have been talking about compliance. We've been talking about market access, attracting what they call investors, or even, have a lighter barrier of entry into some other countries. And also we did discuss a little bit on the clarity of what companies should do is like a blueprint. But beyond all this, what are some other compelling reasons for companies to actually obtain B Corp? I would love to hear from, any one of you would like to take. If Ravi, you can come in, would be fantastic as well to offer a fresh perspective. Yeah.
Okay. most often that most of the certifications that are out there, like, I mean, I would say most companies that already looking at markets in US, in the EU or Japan, they already have some kind of certification in place. They already, because they have to place their services or they have to place their product in those markets. So they already have some standards in place. And what I see is, since they already have those standards in place, in terms of compliance, in terms of meeting the requirements of B Corp standards, even looking at the risks or kind of impacts that B Corp highlighted, it becomes much easier, because you have to just complement whatever that they're already doing it. They already have. They have to just expand on it or build upon it, and also they also focus on different. B Corp also complements that the things that these standards does not focus, like climate, and we also like what Brigitte said. They have different companies have different risk profile. So we have because most of these certification, whether you are small or big, you do have to comply to the same requirements, almost the same. If you have a scope, doesn't matter you're small or big, you have same requirements. But that's what makes B Corp different. So they have a different risk profile. If you're SMEs, you're a smaller company, you have limited requirements to meet. So it makes the companies to be a bit more encouraging for them to comply to B Corp. Yeah, I think that is my opinion.
Thank you.
Could I also add, Yving? Thank you. Why a company should go forward with this? I think it's a question that I've gotten many times. Why, if I'm already doing it? Why should I? Why do you need to tell me? I'm already creating impact. Why should I spend time on this? And I think it's a great question, whoever asked it. I think, especially with the new standards, the standards even before were holistic. The whole point is that it's all the impact areas, right? It's not just about the environment. It's about all the areas. I'm not going to repeat that anymore, but I think just the fact that it's holistic, I think it allows a company to have a roadmap. So you don't have to be questioning, okay, what should I do next? It's, okay, I know where I am. And the other gift that the standards provide us with is that it's continuous improvement is built in. So year 3, year 5, or your surveillance year, depending on the size of your company, means that naturally you will need to be increasing. And you will know when you finished the audit on your first year, what you will need to do to continue to maintain your certification throughout the different checkpoints across the 5-year cycle. So I think the best part, just to recap, is that you know where you are in the 7 impact areas, and you know where you need to get to, and the standards will continuously increase. And lastly, it's that community aspect. So I think one thing is about getting verified and having that seal of approval that's been independently verified, but it's also the community of B Corps. Yesterday and in the evening as well, I got the chance to interact with several companies, and people were using the word family. I found my tribe. It's like-minded individuals who are joined here because you want to see a different economy, and so that is an aspect that doesn't just open new opportunities for business, but it opens new opportunities to continue increasing your impact through other purposeful projects. So, yeah, that's all I wanted to add.
Thank you. I think that's a wonderful one. You brought a wider dimension to it. I like the idea of the communities building, where each other empower each other. Kind of echoing what Brigitte said, not a tree in the desert. So one question, I think this is often some of the questions that we receive. I will make some kind of like interpretation differently. The key question is actually asking, for example, most of the time, like we may not be able to kind of like choose a diverse board members, and often they're not, it is based on merit. But I think the more deeper question is that, since standards are a bit prescriptive, and company situations are pretty dynamic. So how the new standards address this? I believe that we have track setting according to size, according to countries, according to their economic development profile. But within those standards, what are the measures to ensure that we also accommodate the flexible nature of the companies?
Yeah, I can take that question.
Yeah.
So there is built-in flexibility. Like if you are talking about, I can maybe demonstrate that through a couple of examples. Like for instance, there are requirements around like doing a materiality assessment. So understanding what are the most relevant environmental, social issues that companies have in their operations and value chain. And that means that that's really context specific, because like, for instance, like the environmental impact is location specific. It's very different from, from company to company to location. And that means that when companies are trying to address those, their environmental strategies will also differ based on where their material impacts are and what those are. So that's already, let's say, context specific that the standards allows. But there are also requirements where companies can actually choose from a set of options. So there are requirements around justice, equity, diversity, and inclusion. And within those requirements, there are some options that companies can select, because we also understand that this is, again, something that's really specific to the company. And the same also with collective action. So the standards embrace this, which I think is also something unique to the B Corp certification, that companies, regardless of the size, they need to take collective action. But there are 5 different options how companies can do that. It can be that they are mentoring members in their value chain on sustainability. It can also be that they are investing in research, or that they are doing public policy advocacy. So again, depending on the size and the context of the company, they may be able to select the types of collective action that fits their size, their context best. So and there are numerous other requirements as well there where flexibility is built into the requirement.
Thank you, and that's very comforting to hear. So I have a next question. We have been talking about what B Corp is. And there is a question coming in asked, what are the common misconceptions about B Corp or becoming a certified B Corp? Anyone would like to take that up?
I would say, and this is not just the new standards, but of all time, that B Corps are perfect. I think that that's the most, the biggest misconception that I've heard. And I don't want to specifically say it's coming from companies or coming from the market, but B Corps are, they made a commitment, right? And that doesn't mean that because you made the commitment, you immediately have all the areas covered. But, they've taken that big first step to kind of admit to themselves and to others where my weak areas are and where my strengths are. And that is that is what a B Corp is, I think. And so, yeah, I would say they're not perfect, and they made that commitment. Yeah. Anyone wants to add?
Yeah, I think picking up on what Annie just said, I think becoming a B Corp is not the end, is the beginning. And I think it's where, it's led by purpose. And with that purpose, you continue to improve. And then being part of a collaborative community, which is what, yesterday's many inspiring sessions have reminded us, and it's really key to pick up on. And then, so that's not perfect, but it's the beginning of a journey. Sometimes I get asked the difference, right? Because I've launched an impact law firm, and our values and where we help our clients will be purpose, sustainability, and integrity. And integrity is being used in some legal departments to refer to compliance. And some people ask me, what's the difference between compliance and integrity? And I think perhaps that speaks to the movement. Compliance, you do it because you have to, almost being dragged into it. Integrity is when you want to, and you want to make sure you stand by it and you're able to really kind of demonstrate that. So that commitment and that conviction, I think is what being a B Corp is about. So it's a myth to think that, once you're a B Corp and that's the end. It's really beginning of a journey, but an exciting journey, because I think one thing is when you do things that are meaningful and align with your values, you can always do it joyfully. And so I think that's also another key difference that I find being part of this community just always gives me so much joy and always learning from others. Thank you.
Thank you, Vivian. Wow, I still see the current number of questions, but we have limited time. Some of it we are going to address it during our breakout group. Apologies, if I skip your questions, but we have quite a number on the auditor's part. So first is that from your experience auditing, maybe more towards Eleni and Frank. Todd. So what would be some of the learnings that you got there, and what are some of the key barriers that stop them from getting certified? Maybe you can highlight 3 of the most common ones. Yeah.
Sure. So first of all, I know the whole word audit and the whole concept can be a bit overwhelming. A lot of companies are new to this, especially some of the smaller companies. But you have to understand that an audit is a very structured process. And once you learn what to expect, it becomes a bit less daunting. So whether it's a B Lab audit or an RSPO audit, they all tend to have sort of the same underlying structure. And that means to be successful, you need to sort of have the same underlying systems and evidence to be able to succeed. We'll be talking about this a bit more in the breakout, but from a high level, some of the ways that people get tripped up are not having a responsible person assigned to a particular process or task, not having a written process at all. So you need to describe what you're doing, have somebody responsible for that, and have a way of tracking that, which becomes your evidence. So if you have those 3 key components and you have that in mind as you're inputting your information into the B assessment platform, then you're already understanding what the auditor is going to be looking for, and it should help you to sort of avoid some of the major pitfalls. But making sure that you have evidence, rather than just a summary report, the auditor is going to want to take that a step further and see the source data or see the documents related to that summary report. So as you build your information for the B impact assessment, keep those things in mind, and keep in mind what the auditor is going to be looking for, and you'll save yourself trouble once the audit begins.
Thank you, Todd. In fact, we are out of time already, unfortunately, and thank you so much for all the questions that comes in. We will be still around, and especially during the breakout group, if you have burning questions that wish to be answered by Todd and also our panelists here, please feel free to join our breakout group session later on at 3:30. Once again, thank you so much, all the panelists. Thank you so much for the audience as well for listening.